introduction to the session, I will double check whether all the three speakers are already here. I have seen Paul Martins in the list. I have tried to check whether Pak Michael Northcott is here. Pak Michael, are you here? I couldn't find your name in the list. Pak Michael is not here yet. I will check whether Professor Hamidullah is here. I have Hamid Nashim. Is that? Okay. Okay, it's the same person. All right. Okay, thank you very much for joining us and also the participants. So the way I think that this plenary session will be conducted, we will not follow the list of speakers as you probably have seen in the schedule, but after reading their abstracts, I thought that probably we will better to start with Professor Hamidullah because he's the one who is going to give a broader picture about the topic. Will take us back to the historical background, but I hope also to be able to connect with the present context. And then we will invite, hopefully, Pak Michael Northcott will be joining us soon. So we will then will invite Professor Michael Northcott as the second speaker, because he will talk about more specifically about technology, about challenges to humanity. And then we will go to the third speaker, who is probably the furthest from Indonesia, Paul Martins. Probably this time is around 1:30 a.m. in the United States. So he will be joining us. Hopefully, Paul Martins, you won't fall asleep while waiting for your presentation. Okay, so I will briefly introduce our first speaker, who is Professor Hamidullah Marozi. I hope I mentioned your name correctly. Let me see why I couldn't open this. Okay, I want to check the title. Okay, here it is. Epistemological Metrics of Scientific Culture and Technology in Islam and Medieval Muslim India. Judging from the abstract, because I have only been provided with the abstract, it's going to be very interesting. It will be a historical journey back to the golden age, so to speak, about Islam, the technology, the development of knowledge. But as I mentioned earlier, we hope that Professor Hamidullah will be also able to bring it closer to the current context, so that it will make a nice connection with the second speaker. So each of the speaker will have about 15 minutes to share your thought with us. So if we are on time, we will have about 50 minutes with my introduction, and it will give us another 55 minutes for the question and answer. Alright, so now I will invite Professor Hamidullah Marozi to share some of your thoughts related on this topic. Please.
Sorry, I had not, it was muted. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To my sister and all their friends in Indonesia, Dr. Diki and Professor Zain Labudin, and then their friends from different parts of the world who are attending this virtual conference. I have the good fortune yesterday to be part of the introductory session, inaugural session, so I could feel how important is the conference and the title of the conference, and very good presentations were made by all the speakers, which are very much relevant to our times and our cultures, I should say, not only culture. So far as my topic is concerned, I will be talking about various aspects of education, and especially science education, technology, in the perspective of Islam, in the cultural perspective of Islam, and also to try to scrutinize the factors that led to the decline in the quality of Islamic education over the period of time. However, it must be understood at the outset that seen from the historical perspective, the early period of Muslim educational circular included the mundane and natural sciences apart from the purely religious sciences. So whereas we do have such type of syllabi in modern times in our most syllabi of the Islamic world, especially in the madrasa or the peasantry education. I know peasantry after I had been to Indonesia many times, more than 20 times. So I know the culture of peasantry in Indonesia that's very specific to Indonesia. And I have been also to Darashana of Turkey, and then Malaysia as well, and Iran. So, but I could find that we do have that type of combination of, syllabi on technology or natural sciences, which was known as ulumi aqliya, apart from the religious sciences, which were known as ulumi naqliya. To start with, we have to understand what we mean by education in its, general sense, inclusive sense. It is the development of training of one's mind, character, skills. So skills include science, technology, as by instruction, study or example, instructions and training in an institution of learning, the knowledge and skills resulting from such instruction and training, teaching as a system, science or art. So these are various derivations and the meanings which have been given to the term educare. And it is a Latin word which means to bring up. And Oxford Word Finder defines education as giving intellectual, moral, and social instruction to a people, especially a child, as a formal and prolonged process. The dictionary includes providing information, enlightenment, and civilizing and training at various functions of education. The people who advocate the utility theory of education mean by it that the result of education should be useful, which in other words will indicate an educated man is a man who knows how to make machines. That's science, that's technology. Thus, an intrinsic value is attached only to physical satisfaction. In modern connotation of the term education, the useful for him is that which helps us to gratify the needs and desires of the body. But even according to Bertrand Russell, when this is what is meant, the advocates of utility are certainly in the wrong if they enunciate their ultimate philosophy of education, only these things we have achieved. But when we talk about education in the cultural setting, it has other than these utilitarian, functions. Education has different other functions as well. On the other hand, the idea of an ornamental education in the old sense is aristocratic, presupposing a class with plenty of money and no need to work. So these are various theories of education, but still we can say that utility is not the sole aim of education. Some people may still tend to think that the main purpose of education is to increase the number and variety of commodities produced. They may include medicine and hygiene, but they will not feel any enthusiasm for literature or art or philosophy. The aim of education, according to Dr. Arnold, is humbleness of mind, while as Aristotle considered it to produce a magnanimous man, Nietzsche and Kant do not think that the ideal of education is symbolized in Christianity. So this is something, some discussion has been made by scholars who have written on education and the purpose of education, utilitarian or the ornamental education. Russell considers vitality, courage, sensitiveness, and intelligence, which are very important for forming a character. But these are auxiliary intellectual virtues, and then he thinks that the ideal system of education must be democratic, although that ideal may not be immediately attainable. So it should be utilitarian to some extent, it should be ornamental, but it should be democratic also. It should not be confined to few people, and the science culture or the technology culture or the, I should say, knowledge society should not be available only to the few people, the aristocratic lot, but it should be available to other people as well. So this has been, something about, now when we come, when we come to Islam and just want to understand how Islam has tried to deal with the subject, so we find that there has been no dichotomy between these two types of education, whether ornamental or, I should say, utilitarian. In the true sense of the word, the Islamic educational system from Baghdad to Spain remains universal in its scope. As Ismail Raji Faruqi, one of the great thinkers of integration of knowledge, he says that knowledge of Islam and of its civilization is not meant for few. The vision of Islam is not meant for nor needed by the specialists alone. It is for all humans and is designed to elevate all those who possess it to a higher level of existence. Islam abhors the division of humans into cleric and lay. It insists that all men ought to know, teach, and observe the truth. Indeed, the Prophet said, it is obligatory for each male and female Muslim to seek knowledge. And knowledge has been not categorized as what type of knowledge. It is not an otherworldly religion in this way, that we may give to Caesar what is Caesar's and give to God what is God's. It has to deliver both the ends, that is humanistic, religious, as well as utilitarian. Since Islam does not make any difference between one community of people and other in this way, whatever now people of the Muslim world are doing, so that can't be attributed to their religion. And if we see from the theoretical point of view, epistemological point of view, so we have these clear indications. And when we have this cultural studies, we have to see a phenomenon in the cultural setting, not only isolation from that. And for that reason, there must be always the humanistic, element in the education, which has been provided by Islam, as has been mentioned by many scholars of Islam, like Imam Ghazali and Sayyid Shah Nasr, and also in our times by Ismail Raji Faruqi and Badiuzzama Nursi of Turkey. Then Quran mentions that one of the important functions of the prophetic office was to purge the instructed from spiritual and moral vices prior of formal instruction, which has been called tazkiyah in the terminology of the Quran. Between tazkiyah and hikmah, education has been purposefully accommodated to avoid directionlessness. So hikmah includes everything, science, technology, and tazkiyah includes moral instructions. So it is ornamental as well as utilitarian. And the Quran has mentioned about that in chapter 62, verse 2 and 3. It is he who has been sent among the lettered, a messenger from among themselves to rehearse to them his science, to purify them, and to instruct them in the book and wisdom, although they had been before in manifest error. So what is wisdom? We may know what is tazkiyah. We may know what is the stating of the book. Hikmah has been included by Ibn Rushd, Averroes says, as philosophy and science. And I have translated his book, The Attitude of Islam Towards Science and Philosophy. What is the attitude of Islam towards science and philosophy is included in the term hikmah. And وَمَنْ يُؤْتِ الْحِكْمَةَ فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا. It has been said, whosoever has been endowed with hikmah, he has been endowed with the greatest good. And we know for that reason that Prophet ﷺ has used the technology of the Persians during war, that is making trenches, using stamp. And it was during the time of the Prophet that some of their companions were sent to learn languages like Hebrew, Persian, and other languages, Syriac language. So it is not confined only to religious instruction. It was also including all other aspects of teaching and learning in that. Of these curiosity, and then there are other such type of issues which Quran has mentioned. For example, when Quran talks about creation of heavens and earth and says that there are signs in the creation of heavens and earth and alteration of day and night, that includes cosmology, that includes astronomy and earth geology, geography, and such other sciences. And for that reason, it has been mentioned by William Brefall that after coming of Islam, the science could flourish. Otherwise, it was very difficult if we had worshipped heavenly bodies, how we could think about these as to be the subjects for our inquiry and research. And it was because of that reason that Quran liberated human mind from the superstitious thinking, so that they may not consider this nature as God, but they may just try to study it and conquer it and use it for betterment of human beings. Here these Quranic verses clearly depict the attitude of a believing scientist and researcher, how he approaches the universe in the course of his study and exploration. And this point has been mentioned by Prophet Abdul Salam, who was given Nobel Prize, along with Wensberg, that he says, when I was working on the unification theory, on which he was given Nobel Prize, and Quran helped me when I reached to the verse of the Quran, that is, لَن تَرَى فِي خَلْقِ الرَّحْمَنِ مِن تَفَاوَةٍ. You don't find any discrepancy in the creation of God. In the heavens and earth, there is the same law. That is the natural law. And he says that Quran has helped me to reach to this conclusion. And he says that Muslims have not persecuted any scholar or scientist because of scientific views. Maybe there was some such type of trial and tribulation for some scholars because of their religious belief, but not because of scientific beliefs. So it's an interesting subject he has mentioned. After assessing this theoretical background, we can now see that Islam has also a glorious tradition of the comprehensive concept of knowledge, which includes all other subjects, mundane sciences. To start with, Zayd bin Sabit was ordered by the Prophet to learn Hebrew language, as I mentioned already. In another narration, the prisoners of war of Badr, they were employed to teach 10 Ansar children art of writing. And that art of writing was not about Quran, that was about mundane sciences. The people of the bench were being taught the Quran besides their training in the art of writing by a famous companion of the Prophet, Abdullah bin Sabit. In the same way, Sahabat binti Abdullah Adwiya was conversant with the art of writing. So these are some of the points which I have mentioned, but there are some other points which I would like to mention. But after this very glorious tradition, and we know that during the time of Abbasidis Mansur Abbasi, he got the Baitul Hikmah, and in Baitul Hikmah all the important books on science, astronomy, philosophy, algebra, as has been enumerated by Al-Kindi, Yaqub Al-Kindi, that there had been 37 sciences which were being taught in those days at Baitul Hikmah, in which even meteorology was included, music was included, and medicine was included, and something was useful was that which was based on the knowledge of the Greeks, and it was improved by the Muslims. That was being taught in the various type of schools and colleges of Islamic world. But it is very strange that after this glorious tradition, Muslims could not keep pace with that, and as Abdul Salam has rightly said, that mostly in modern times, Muslims are lagging behind in scientific temper, and in all the whole communities of the nations, Muslims could not make their position, in science very strong. And it has been said by Parvez Hudbai, he says even after the defeat in 1967, the Arabs could not think that science is one of the major factors for progress in this world and also to make yourself, to defend yourself against any aggression. But then there was a great conference was held in Kuwait, where the vice chancellors and rectors of 27 universities of the Arab world were invited, and the conclusion of that was that if we teach science, it will produce both lives, and that will be deviation from the faith. That's basically the cultural setting we have nowadays, Islamic world has in modern times. We have just lost touch with the actual Quranic teachings and our past glory, and we have become moribund in thinking. And about science, our viewpoint is very, I should say, very orthodox and very dogmatic. And the result of that is that we are not creating a scientific culture in Islamic world, and Muslims have become very much more superstitious about many things. And the madrasa and their seminaries are not providing the guidance, as once upon a time people like Ibn Khaldun and Al-Khwarizmi and Ibn Hassan and Al-Biruni, who were the greatest scientists, and after Al-Khwarizmi's name is the algorithm. So such people were produced by Islam, and Ahmad Lahori, who constructed Taj Mahal. So, but we have no such type of syllabi nowadays, where we can produce such type of scholars and stalwarts in science and technology and philosophy, culture and rational disciplines. So that is because of our own decadence in thinking and action. It is not because of the culture or the religion which was produced by earlier, I should say, the companions of the Prophet. For us, the culture of scientific inquiry and the discussion, which has been also testified by the scholars like William Brefhold and Graham Lando and Bertrand Russell, and so many Western scholars, as has been said by, in Arabic quotation, Al-Fazlu ma shahida bil ada. The greatness is that which is being witnessed by even the adversaries. So world has accepted this, and we know that the statue of Ibn Sina and Al-Farabi has been stationed outside the Naples University, and the statue of Ibn Rushd is outside the Barcelona University, because West considers our past heroes as their heroes nowadays in science and technology and scientific culture. So now we need to revive that culture, and that's only possible when we integrate knowledge, religious knowledge with scientific knowledge, as the scheme which has been given by Badiuzzama Nursi in the forum of the Madrasatul Zahra, and also say that in one hand we should have Quran, in second hand we should have science. And if this type of understanding is created in our educational curriculum, through the educational curriculum, there is every hope that again we can gain that glory. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry. Thank you very much, Professor Hamidullah. It's a very interesting, you have raised some very interesting points to start the discussion for today. I share your enthusiasm, being myself as a lecturer on Islamic philosophy. So that you underline many important points in the history of thought in Islam, mentioning great Muslim scholars in the past, while also underlining the importance to revive. So not only to being proud of what have been done in the past by those Muslim scholars, but also more importantly, how to bring it back to our own context. So you underline some important points related, for example, to key points on wisdom, on purification, on tazkiyah. And you underline also the importance of studying literature, arts, philosophy, of course, in addition to religious sciences and natural sciences. But you also claim that our way of learning now, and especially you are referring in the Muslim world, is being more dogmatic, if I understand you correctly. Yeah. But that, with that notion, I would like actually to link it to the second speaker, and I'm very honored to introduce and to call Pak Michael, this is how we call him, Professor Michael Northcott, who is based at the University of Edinburgh, but also has been with us here at ICRS for the past 2 years, if I'm not mistaken, or even 3 years maybe, as a visiting professor. So, linking the points that have been raised by Professor Hamidullah, I would like now to turn our attention to Pak Michael's presentation, and I highlighted already some keywords, and knowing Pak Michael himself personally, it's very interesting how I think Pak Michael will underline in the context of COVID-19 what he saw as the colonialization of public space. And then the second point is on the replacement of democracy with technocracy. And also we look at the ethical and political implications of what he will discuss as the proposed social transformation. All right, Pak Michael, please, 15 to maximum 20 minutes. Time is yours.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Madam Chairman. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yeah.
I shared the screen. You can see the slides, yeah? Okay, so I call this talk Technology, Transformation and Technocracy after COVID-19. Yeah. So since the war on terror was announced by President G.W. Bush after the 9/11 2001 destruction of the World Trade Center in New York City, the West and much of the rest of the world has been living under a state of exception in which the US and other states claims the right to indefinitely detain enemy aliens and even citizens by suspending normal legal rights not to be arrested in the name of national or international security. The war on terror is going on still. It was, however, and is and remains a fake war. No nation was or is formally at war with the US, the UK, Germany, Spain, and so on. And many terror incidents were false flags by Western intelligence services to promote the reign of terror, including a very well-documented case by Edinburgh University and other scholars, the so-called chemical weapons attack in Douma in Syria in 2018. The war on terror was used to prosecute wars, drone attacks, intelligence operations, bans and arrests of individuals by the US and other nation states in multiple, but almost always Muslim domains, which resulted in more than 1 million deaths by violence in Iraq alone. But we see the real war on terror now in Syria, where US and UK funded Muslim terrorists. Again, this is documented by colleagues at the University of Edinburgh, belonging to Islamic State, ISIS, and the self-declared caliphate, apparently backed by the West in attempting to remove Bashar Assad's Syrian government. This is the public exposure of the so-called war on terror, and it's a scandal. The brand war on terror was marketed using public relations companies, propaganda, and advertising devised to promote fear of the other, and especially of Muslims. Muslims were particularly exposed to the accusation they were the enemy in the war on terror, even although evidence emerged very soon after the events of 9/11, that many of the events on that day were known in advance by individuals and indeed by the US intelligence, and even that the buildings were not destroyed by planes flying into them, but were in fact demolished with explosives, as now has been confirmed by a scientific inquiry inside the United States. Now, in October 2019, New York City was the host for yet another big world event, PLAN. It's now called the Plandemic. It was called at the time Event 201. In this Event 201, a new global war was declared, this time against microbes, not Muslims, and it was war gamed by government officials, financiers, media, and public health experts from the Republic of China, People's Republic of China, from the United States, from the European Union, and from the United Kingdom. The event was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, sponsored by Johns Hopkins University, whose medical departments received huge funds also from the Gates organization. And the plot of the war game was that a novel coronavirus would be released in Wuhan, China in November 2019, and that this would rapidly turn into a global pandemic. Topics discussed. The main focus of the day-long war game was not how to prevent such an event, surprisingly. The two main things to discuss were how to get the maximum amount of money out of governments for global vaccine operations, including Gates' funded own organization, Gavi, and pharmaceutical companies and the WHO. And secondly, how to manage public perceptions of the alleged pandemic. And they used the phrase by flooding the zone of media, social media, and internet sites with fear messaging. The virus duly appeared in Wuhan in December 2019, and a global emergency was declared by WHO in January 2020. States of emergency rapidly spread around the planet, in which normal rights and freedoms were declared suspended, with unprecedented procedures, including lockdowns, a phrase that comes from the US prison system and has a medical background or evidence-based, but also universal mask mandates, a strange new procedure called social distancing, I prefer to call it anti-social distancing, and increasingly coercive medical tests, and now mass adult and even, we're told, children vaccination. As with the war on terror, the war on microbes was branded and advertised by governments and media with fear messaging. In China in particular, communist China, just to remind you, ran millions of social media messages showing an actor lying on a pavement in Wuhan. You can clearly see in the photograph, they're lying on the floor. They've not collapsed, they're literally lying out flat. Even though the infection fatality rate of 0.23% to 0.05% of COVID-19 was and is the same as seasonal flu influenza, according to an article published by the World Health Organization in 2020 and again in 2021. Now I see a clear parallel here then between the war on terror and the war on microbes. Neither are lawful wars. They both have highly controversial evidence bases. No external Muslim nation or organization attacked America on September the 11th, 2001, and certainly not the countries America has subsequently invaded and tried to destroy. These include Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, to name just four, and of course, Yemen, where there is literally a Holocaust going on at this time in a Muslim nation who is not at war with Saudi Arabia or the United States, but which Saudi Arabia and the US are literally destroying piece by piece. Al-Qaeda is a nomenclature created by the CIA to describe the Mujahideen it supported via Saudi Arabia to fight Russia when Russia occupied Afghanistan. The Western powers, of course, have a long history of creating false flag incidents to persuade their own citizens of the legitimacy of the wars they wish to undertake, including attacks on the homeland. I won't go into Pearl Harbor here, but we could talk about it later. US scientists concluded in a scientific study of 9/11 that one of the three buildings, which was supposed to have been destroyed by the airplanes and subsequent fires, World Trade 7, Center 7, which happens to have housed the Secret Service, the CIA, the Department of Defense and Office of Emergency Management, was brought down by a controlled explosion and not, as the official investigation said, by fires caused by airplanes flown by Muslims. Similarly, COVID-19 is not a uniquely deadly or infectious virus. The war on microbes is a hype. Scientific evidence does not support it. WHO Bulletin's latest study on the evidence for the effectivity of COVID-19 draws on 67 countries and found the influenza for all ages at 0.27% of an infection fatality rate. For those under 70, the IFR is 0.05% globally, which means for all ages below 70, COVID-19 is less dangerous than the flu. Also, mortality rates globally in 2020, unlike, let's say, the Spanish flu, were not exceptional. Deaths attributed to COVID-19 in my country and in many others were 95% elderly people over the age of 80, which is the normal age of death in the United Kingdom. The same holds true for the United States. In Indonesia, COVID-19 deaths are also attributed, deaths are also 95% elderly, and the death rate in Indonesia is remarkably low at only 0.005%. Now, just to remind you, in case you're scared by the daily statistics that you see on the TV and even on your phones, 600 people normally die every day on average in Indonesia. This is a very large country of 260 million people. Most of them die of old age. The next biggest categories which cause deaths, other than those of simply chronic illness, are air pollution. 130,000 a year die earlier because of that, and 68,000 die early every year because of traffic accidents. The last time I looked, we were told 3,700 in 12 months had died of or with COVID. This is just 7 days of normal elderly mortality in a 12-month period, and I submit it is not evidence of a pandemic, which means an all-age mortality event in Indonesia. Now, how to understand these events from an academic point of view is something which I've devoted a lot of time in the last 10 years or more. Unfortunately, I think that the Nazi jurist Carl Schmitt is very helpful in understanding these events. I say unfortunately because in some ways he collaborated with the Nazis. Nonetheless, his book, Political Theology, I think, explains a lot of what's currently going on. Both the war on terror and the war on microbes are illusory, but they gave rise to states of emergency, in which normal laws, rights, and freedoms are suspended. So, for example, here in Indonesia, many of us are told we cannot normally breathe air. We can only breathe with the permission of the government when we go outside if we wear masks. Now, that is a state of emergency, to breathe air without masks. COVID-19, even more than the war on terror, has involved historically unprecedented controls on citizen movements, invasive bodily searches, including scans, x-rays, blood and DNA tests, luggage searches, house invasions and arrests, forcible quarantining, border, business and school closures, and curfews, and much more. Carl Schmitt described the state of exception as that condition initiated by a sovereign power, which suspends law and inaugurates totalitarian rule over citizens whose normal rights are expended. The state of exception indicates the sovereign assumes power over the body of those who live within its territories on the basis of an alleged enemy, whether in the form of an external or internal enemy, such as leftists, communists, Muslims, or microbes. The Nazi era in which Schmitt lived was, of course, one such state of exception, which began when Hitler suspended the law in 1993, and Merkel did the same thing in March, much to the horror of many Germans, when she suspended the basic law. Hitler's suspension lasted 12 years. The overthrow of Sukarno in Indonesia, to bring this home, in 1965 also produced a state of exception. It was never formally declared, as far as I can determine, in Indonesian law, but in the following 18 months, state and private actors operating under at least a pragmatic suspension of the normal monopoly of violence killed somewhere between 500,000 and 1 million Indonesians said to be leftists or communists. As with Event 201, there is now evidence in the public domain of pre-planning of those events in Indonesia by the United States, and in particular the US Embassy in Jakarta, which supplied hundreds of thousands of names it claimed were communists to the Suharto regime. Indonesia has also got extensive experience of the fake war on terror, including most viscerally the Bali bombing, which led Australian PM John Howard to join the United States war on terror within 1 week of the bomb, which was obviously principally aimed not at Indonesia, but Australia. Indonesia was merely being used as a way to draw Australia into the war on terror. Now, the official story of that bomb is that the uniquely destructive power of an underground, high-tech fireball, which left a huge crater in the ground and vaporized people in the building and stripped concrete off steel within hundreds of yards and destroyed 27 buildings and spread shrapnel over a 2-kilometer radius, was procured by a Muslim terrorist motorbike mechanic. I don't believe the story, I'm sorry. Giorgio Agamben's analysis of the state of exception links it to what Michel Foucault calls biopolitics, in which the sovereign claims authority and power over their life, which is to say their bodies, bloodstreams, bodily movements, and now even breathing of citizens. Foucault's biopolitics charted how attempts, I just received a message, I'm hoping it doesn't tell me you can't hear what I'm saying. It doesn't. Foucault's biopolitics charted how attempts to control plagues and reproduction gave rise to modern states' claims to rule the air, bodies, lands, microbes, and waterways, and led to the birth, latterly, of market liberalism or neoliberalism and a new art of government. In French, gouvernement means the rule of minds. Govern means rule, mentalité means mind. So the rule of minds as well as bodies by industrial states through technical control of nature and humans by psychology, by genetic engineering, by nuclear fission and chemical weapons, all deployed to engineer plants, animals, soils, viruses, and now via mRNA gene editing technology and COVID-19 vaccines, human beings. And of course also to manufacture consent in the media and social media. Carl Schmitt believed the modern state of exception will be normalized and eventually give rise to rule by experts or technocracy, which would eventually replace liberal democracies, because modern technologies create a set of interconnected social and planetary conditions which politicians cannot control, so they outrun, allegedly, democratic deliberation and turn society into a giant industrial machine. Ulrich Beck said something very similar in his book, A Risk Society. But I prefer the thought of C.S. Lewis, the Christian philosopher and author of the Narnia stories that some children in Indonesia may know of from films or reading in translation. If we're all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, that bomb, and I have to say, this reminds me of the Quran. Remember what Muhammad said, the Prophet, peace be upon him? If the end of the world is tomorrow, it should find us planting trees today. But here we have Lewis saying something very similar. Let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things. Praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting with our friends over a pipe, and a game of darts, not huddled together like frightened sheep and thinking about bombs. They make our bodies, and this is Lewis's quote, a microbe can also do that, but they may not, need not dominate our minds. Political climate at the atomic age, the war on terror, and now the war on microbes is fear. Fear of others, fear of microbes, fear of death, fear of extinction. But despite the fear of nuclear war, Britain just announced it's going to hold more bombs, nuclear bombs, than it's ever held before. Despite the alleged need to fear Muslims, the US and the UK continue to invade Muslim lands and even employ Muslims as so-called radicals, so-called terrorists to fight the people that, for whatever reason, the US and the UK want out of the way. Syria seems to me most obviously because it's seen as a threat to Israel, and particularly Israel's occupation of the Golan Heights. And finally, the fear of microbes. But of course, even as we have been trained to fear microbes, the United States, the United Kingdom, Switzerland and Germany and China continue to pursue gene engineering of viruses in laboratories like the one at Wuhan, known as gain-of-function engineering, to create new viruses, modified viruses, which can infect humans in a way that the unmodified viruses cannot, as happened in the case of SARS-CoV-2, in order to provide capitalistic opportunities for drug companies to create and sell vaccines. Fear is a political emotion used to control societies and citizens and to transform them now towards totalitarian biopolitical control over bodies, cells, genes, microbes, minds, and the planet's surface and even its atmosphere. The projected transformation of societies is towards a permanent state of technological war with microbes, known as the new norm, and related projects including the fourth industrial revolution, the Internet of Things, about which my colleague Dr. Martin will soon speak, smart cities and digital currencies to track every value exchange on the planet ultimately. Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum, which he of course founded, coined the phrase to promote permanent social distancing, track and trace, the use of QR codes linked to enforced medical tests and vaccines for entry to trains, planes, shops and offices, contactless food and service provision, mask mandates, annual forced mass vaccinations, and to replace democracy and the rule of law with technocracy, ruled by experts, but heavily censored experts. As many of us are finding on the internet, they don't actually want the real science. They only want the media-approved narrative. Schwab proposes a merger of biological, psychological, digital, and AI technologies in his troubling book, COVID-19 and the Great Reset. In this book, he proposes that gene editing by vaccines, immune systems colonized by nanobots, brains colonized and controlled by smart dust that can interact with machines on the Internet of Things, and 5G irradiated so-called smart cities, where thoughts as well as actions will be surveyed. Schwab thinks this is wonderful. This is the utopian future he wants. He describes COVID-19 as the opportunity for this great transformation of society, which will allow governments and corporations to control every detail of the lives of citizens, from what they eat, what's in their bloodstream, who they meet, where they go, what they think and create. Oh, I'm almost out of time, but technocracy has a long history. It was first proposed in the 1930s. It has roots in French atheist positivism in the 19th century. It very much took over in the 1970s in the US, when the US government was taken over by the Trilateral Commission, which was set up between Japan, the European Union, and America by Henry Kissinger and David Rockefeller in 1972. The Commission argued in a very important report that there's a basic crisis in democracy and we need to move on from democracy to technocracy, which is government by the 1%. And COVID-19 is being used to accelerate that crisis, which is fundamentally a transfer of wealth from small and medium-sized businesses and working and middle-class households to investment bankers, large corporations, including Amazon, Apple, Google, Facebook, and so on. COVID-19 is advancing the descent of liberal democracies into techno-fascism, in which states partner with giant technological and chemical companies to control the lives of citizens for maximal extraction of value and medical apartheid, which they already have in Israel, by the way. In conclusion, Giorgio Agamben, an amazing Italian philosopher, in his recent book, Where Are We Now? The Epidemic as Politics, concludes the book with these very important words. If the juridical political apparatus of the Great Transformation is a state of exception, and the religious apparatus is science, on the social plane, this transformation relies for its efficacy upon digital technology, which, as is now evident, works in harmony with the new structure of relationships known as social distancing. Human relationships will have to happen on every occasion as much as possible now without physical presence, like this conference, for the most part. They'll be relegated to digital devices. The new model of social relation is connection, and whoever is not connected will be excluded and marginalized. Finally, what accounts for the strength of the current transformation is also, as it happens, its weakness. I hope Agamben is right about this. The dissemination of the sanitation terror needed an acquiescent and undivided media to produce a consensus, something that will prove difficult to preserve. The medical religion, like every religion, has its heretics and dissenters, I will acknowledge being one of them, and respected voices coming from many directions having contested the actuality and gravity of the epidemic, neither of which can be sustained indefinitely via the numbers. What is certain is that new forms of resistance will be necessary, and those who can still envision a politics to come should be unhesitatingly committed to them. The politics to come will not have the obsolete shape of bourgeois democracy, nor the form of the technological sanitationist despotism that is replacing it. Thank you very much. And many of you will know this song, it's not time to play it, but as in many of Bob Marley's lyrics, it's an astonishingly prophetic song with a strong religious undertone. And these are my references briefly. I will put these slides in a public place later, if you want to look at them again. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Pa Michael, for always challenging and provocative in a way, especially for those who do not agree with what you think. But that's a good sign for us to have some questions and discussion later. So, as you notice while presenting this material, Pa Michael, and at the end he showed us the list of references. It's not just, at least from Pa Michael's point of view, it's not just based on claim, you know, but it is based on scientific data. So I hope we will have more discussion on that. Whether it is true that at certain age, as Pa Michael said, at a certain age group, I think it was like below 70, you mentioned that the mortality rate is,
0.05%.
Caused by COVID is actually, it's
0.05%. However, in Indonesia, it's 0.005%.
Yes, yes.
Only
So,
12 in a million have died of, allegedly, COVID-19. There were many cases in Lombok, Bali, and Java, where COVID-19 was put on the death certificate against the wishes of the relatives who did not detect any of the classic COVID-19 symptoms. Thank you.
okay, thank you, Pa Michael. So we will have, we will go back, come back later to this issue, Pa Michael. But now let me invite Associate Professor Paul Martin, who has been quite close to us for the past year, I would say. Associate Professor Paul Martins have been teaching team taught with us with Pak Diki Sofyan last semester and this semester with me and Pak Isaac Latu with students from Baylor University. So in his presentation, I think why I deliberately put Paul Martins at the end of the presentation, even though Paul also shared some concerns, I think, with what Michael stated earlier, but in the presentation, Paul Martin will look specifically on the issue of how what the term called is Internet of Things have consequences, ethical consequences in our life now. But what I like from the abstract, judging from the abstract, is at the end of the abstract, I think there is still some hope that Paul Martin said, okay, the future, what will happen in the future is still in our hand. So I interpret that as a good sign that even though probably, we are already, covered in this worried fear, as Michael said earlier, but we do hope that probably from the presentation from Paul Martin, we can still see some lights, how we might change the way forward after all what happened to us. Okay, Paul, please. 15 to maximum, if you can make it 15 minutes, but maximum 20 minutes.
Can you see my screen? Is that visible?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for
I
the.
see your face.
Okay.
Okay, not in my screen, but yeah, okay.
Okay. Well, my face isn't that important. If you can see the screen, that's fine for now too. It's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here, and I look forward to joining this conversation as we think together about the deep interconnections between culture, technology, social transformation, and human dignity. So in the next few minutes, I just want to add a few concluding reflections that have particular relevance to the conference theme while we continue to struggle with COVID-19, whether with COVID-19 itself or its ramifications. We'll talk about that later, perhaps. So I want to say a few things up front about the Internet of Things in our everyday lives. Let me begin by making the present world very obvious. So today, human beings in urban environments are surrounded by up to 5,000 trackable objects, and the number of online capable devices in existence vastly exceeds the population of the world. And by trackable devices, I simply mean things like cell phones, but watches, tablets, computers, and then there's GPS trackers for children, senior citizens, and pets apparently. But it's a way you can find your keys on your phone, and the list goes on. And now these tracking devices communicate wirelessly with one another with varying levels of security. And this is what's referred to as the Internet of Things. And so just a working definition here. The Internet of Things is a network of physical things or objects that contain sensors, software, and other technologies for the purpose of connecting and exchanging data with other devices and systems on the Internet. And so most of this is pretty benign and everyday for us. And so I want to use the example of Strava to kind of illustrate how this works at just a very flying level. So Strava is an internet service for tracking and sharing exercise data. It's free to use, and the tracking is accomplished through a watch or other device or something like that. And it's useful for humble bragging about athletic accomplishments, of course. And so I've given you a picture of what Strava looks like. A recent run, well, not recent, probably the longest run I've done in a while, so humble bragging, of course. It gives you a map of where you've gone. It gives you how long it took you, how much elevation, your pace, this sort of thing. And this is the sort of thing that you send to your friends. They see it, they give you a thumbs up, and et cetera, et cetera. It's a way to stay in touch with folks. And so this is where the Internet of Things, at a very superficial level, is part and parcel of my life and most of my friends. But this benign example, in and of itself, is also a little less than benign, and I wanted to show you why. So, several years ago, Strava aggregated data from 2015 to 2017 and made it public. Now, Strava has 27 million users, including many of my friends, but all around the world. And they revealed these heat maps and made them public so that communities could see which parts of the city, which parts of the town were being used frequently for people doing exercise. And as they did so, very quickly it became clear that this aggregate data was of incredible value to all kinds of other people, because all the soldiers and military personnel at the military bases around the world are also using Strava. And so what you could see very quickly is where all of these bases were. You could see the American bases and you could see the Russian bases. Apparently Iranians don't use Strava, so those were still all dark. But the example here that I've given is, this is the Bagram Air Base in Afghanistan. And suddenly, if you look, you can tell where the perimeters are, and you can also tell internally where most of the traffic goes by the various lines that are drawn. And so this, I give you as a very kind of quick and easy example of how the Internet of Things, which we use on an everyday basis for fun, can be less than fun, or more than fun, depending on your perspective. And this is precisely how the Internet of Things works in both its good and bad forms. So let me then just change over from just a basic introduction to Internet of Things to talk a little bit about health surveillance, and then we'll move further. So what is health surveillance? Well, health surveillance is how public health it's the basis on which public health is formed. And its definition, that's for a working easy definition here too, the continuous systematic collection, analysis, and interpretation of health-related data needed for the planning, implementation, and evaluation of public health practice. Now, public health has been around for decades. This is not a new kind of invention. And it tracks infectious disease, chronic disease, injuries, health services, vector-borne diseases, and natural disasters. And this in and of itself sounds great. Why would you not want this if you're concerned about the health of your population? And so this brings us then immediately to the role of the Internet of Things in health surveillance. Now, I know all of us are very concerned about our social media presences, And of course, we keep these things as much as we can, or when we can, keep them private. But we should also know that private means private, at least in the first round, but probably not after that. Health surveillance is based on data, which is collected in many different ways. And one of these is social media posts. So if you say, I broke my leg today, that's going to be registered and picked up by public health professionals. Facebook is going to sell that data to public health professionals. And if you say, I have COVID, public health is going to immediately receive that notification. And it's in fact on the basis of these sort of social media posts or search engine inquiries that much of the public health surveillance is carried out today. And so when you post, these things and only your friends can see it, what that means is only your friends can see that you're posting it right now. What it also means is that that data is aggregated and then sold to or shared with other intragovernmental or private universities, public-private universities. So that's one huge way, and we're going to look at an example shortly, but that's one huge way in which public health surveillance is carried out today. Of course, you have doctor visits, but that's one of many other ways in which this plays itself out. We also have monitoring devices of various kinds, heart rate, temperature, glucose levels. We have ingestible devices, which kind of scares me in some ways, but it's probably easier to ingest some of these devices than to have other things pushed into your stomach. And wearables like contact lenses with cameras. I didn't know these things existed. These seem to be like the kinds of things you see in movies, but literally these things exist. So there's ways in which the Internet of Things is already deeply involved in health surveillance. And then all of the ways in which this is then communicated with healthcare providers is also through the Internet. Increasingly with COVID-19, but even prior to. So let's look again at kind of a fairly benign example. Health Map is one of these kind of public-private partnerships that draw some of this together from different new data sources, eyewitness reports, curated discussion, and validated official documents. And its purpose is to kind of achieve a unified and comprehensive view of the current global state of infectious disease and their effect on human and animal health. And if possible, I'm going to try to pull up the website to show you what it looks like. Oh yes, here we go. We'll back out of Texas and let's look at the kind of world view here. All right, so this is what Health Map looks like, based in many cases primarily on the Internet of Things. And so you can look for a variety of things, respiratory alerts, animal alerts, gastrointestinal alerts. I can't believe there's only 8. There's got to be more foodborne illness in the world at any given time, but I understand. And then you can look at flu counts and look at COVID-19 case counts in a variety of ways. And pull this up very quickly, and you can see numerically where these new and you can zoom in as you want. But you can see how even at this very publicly available in this publicly available space, these sorts of things are happening. But if you think about it further and you press further, this sort of health surveillance is happening among other entities as well. And I'm going to mention just one. I don't want to spend too much time on this for now. We can come back around to it. But the Health Surveillance Explorer is a website generated by the US military, and it's a dynamic common access card enabled mapping application that allows geographic combatant commands to identify global health threats and disease outbreaks in near real time. And it helps protect the health and readiness of the forces whenever they may be deployed in the world. So you can imagine then the access of information, the access to information that this group has that Health Map doesn't, and how they get that information. And so again, very quickly, we begin to see how the benign version of these Internet of Things, even serving the good, can be employed in a variety of ways. Now, if if you read how the Internet of Things and COVID-19, in the context of COVID-19, you would imagine that Internet of Things is profoundly positive. And I want to just read a couple of preliminary conclusions in the research literature. And I don't have a picture here because research literature is meant to be boring. So I'm just going to read these because that's how it works. But let me read them quickly. The Internet of Things is helpful for an infected patient of COVID-19 to identify symptoms and provide better treatment rapidly. It is useful for patients, physicians, surgeons, and hospital management. And this is July, August 2020. Later in 2020, the Internet of Things is a promising technology for rapid diagnosis, dynamic monitoring and tracking, better treatment and control without spreading the virus to others. And even later in November 2020, the Internet of Things technology has shown promising results in early detection, quarantine time, and after recovery for COVID-19. However, as we learn more about the virus and its behavior, we should adjust and improve our approaches in different phases. For example, it would be interesting to integrate artificial intelligence and Internet of Things technology in order to use AI power to minimize interactions between healthcare workers and patients in all phases, and as a Journal of Healthcare Informatics Research. This is how health practitioners generally perceive the role of Internet of Things as it encounters COVID-19. And more, and so here's where things get interesting. So COVID-19 is not only, the Internet of Things relation to COVID-19 is not only for COVID-19, it's also a driver for the Internet of Things innovation. And looking from market perspective in 2020, since the scientific data is not readily available when the pandemics occur with new pathogens, the role of the Internet of Things becomes critical and is facilitated if the country has adequate telecom bandwidth and coverage, as well as access to cloud infrastructure. And essentially, this is a call to countries and communities to prepare for pandemics by building their Internet of Things infrastructure. And so they see COVID-19 as the kind of driver that instigates this sort of investment in growth. And this then is built upon even further and kind of monetized in Computer Weekly in late 2020. And they say that in a global study of 1,639 businesses globally, adopters of the Internet of Things believed it was vital to keeping them going, with 84% indicating technology was key to maintaining business continuity during the pandemic. And as a result, the majority of adopters now viewed the integration of the Internet devices with workers as a high priority, and 73% agreed that the pandemic would accelerate their adoption plan. So you can see then, through COVID-19, it's become clear to businesses, or businesses have realized, that the Internet of Things is actually also good for their businesses. And hence the kind of graphic that I've posted here. But at that moment then, I want to just step back and reflect a little bit on where we've come and where we're going, and how the logic of this trajectory seems to be, where it seems to be taking us. I want to suggest that the disruption of the pandemic and the challenges it poses to the world as we know it offers an opportunity to rethink our relations to one another and our society at a fundamental level. Or, since there is no going back to pre-COVID, how do we strengthen human dignity in the present and for the future? And so I want to ask some questions, make a few suggestions, and then in many ways leave it for the younger generation to chew on this for a while, because it is more your world than it is mine at this point. So of course, the first thing everyone brings up is privacy, and that is a real thing. And so I want to acknowledge that the data privacy is essential, even in the face of pandemic necessity. But I also want to suggest that the concern for privacy is parasitic on a deeper concern. Or why does privacy matter is the question that I want to address. What is it about human beings and ourselves that makes us think that privacy should be an issue in the first place? And I want to suggest that it assumes something about humans that ought not be violated, that humans are more than animals or commodities that can be used for any desirable purpose. And I think people understand this in a deep way, and it's also claimed by basically all of our religious traditions. So I want to say that privacy is a real concern, but privacy should drive us to reflection on why privacy is a concern. And I think it implicitly assumes some notion of dignity as a basis for these privacy rights. And further, I want to suggest, as we attempt to cultivate human dignity in the face of the Internet of Things, I think the first step is, I think we ought to remember our home is the earth and not the internet. And sometimes, even with my own kids, it seems like they live more in an internet world than they do in the real physical world. And the graphic there is pretty Harvard, of course, and really revealing. But I think it helps just saying, we don't eat plastic and we can't breathe data. So surviving COVID-19 cannot be allowed to hide the death trajectory we are currently on. And I think that we need to remind ourselves of that. And also, just to restate, we're not machines, and we are not in the service of machines. And I think Michael Northcott has said this years ago, more technology will not solve the technology-driven problems we are facing today. And then lastly, ecological and communal rethinking of belonging is going to be fundamentally necessary to provide us with any kind of common ground to respond to the Internet of Things. Then step two, how is human dignity cultivated or protected? I think we need to begin with that concern in technological innovation, in the innovation phase, and don't wait until the technology is developed and then try to regulate it. That seems just completely backwards, and I think we often forget that. So curiosity and financial prosperity cannot be the primary drivers of innovation. And we have to find a way to cultivate innovation in community for communities and not in isolation without consultation. And I know that sounds profoundly cliched, but it's also true. And third, how do we cultivate and strengthen dignity? We have to remember that all data collected can be used for good or ill. And this is where the examples that I given earlier, the simple drawn Strava and health surveillance. And so I think we have to rethink data and refuse to let data be owned by the powerful. And there's some studies done here, and this is where it was kind of eye-opening to me. It's something I intuitively understood, but once you see the data, it's fascinating. Americans generally favor their own data privacy. Well, generally, they don't favor the data privacy of foreigners or perceived threats. And I think that's reflective of pretty much every dominant power in any given place. Privacy for me, but not necessarily for you. And so I think this extends, in the context of COVID, it extends beyond that. And this is where we need to really think carefully about the kinds of data we collect and how we collect it, because whatever we collect on other people is being collected on us. And that's a very real concern we ought to be worried about. And we ought to share that concern collectively. And so I might even go so far as say, if data cannot be protected from abuse in this way, it probably shouldn't be collected. And so just in a final concluding word, I do want to say that COVID-19 has reshaped our life and will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. I have two of my daughters had COVID, and they haven't entirely recovered months later, actually close to half a year later. And I have a good friend whose son is still wheelchair bound after his exposure, his episode with COVID-19. So I think those are, and a variety of other encounters, of course, as well, but those are ways in which, obviously, many people's individual lives won't go back to normal. But I think even those of us who haven't had it or have recovered and didn't die, it has reshaped our life and will continue to do so in the foreseeable future. And I want to suggest and encourage us collectively, I think we ought to use this opportunity to imagine not how to return to how life used to be. I think that's not possible. But to work towards a new way of communal flourishing with dignity. And that way cannot be paved with data, technology, and surveillance alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think you have approached the issue of COVID-19 through a different lens this afternoon. But I think the concern about giving attention to humanity, to dignity, at that point, I think you share also the points that was raised earlier by Michael. So I'm not going to conclude further, considering that we only have approximately 20 to 25 minutes for the question and answer session. The way I will take the questions from the audience, I will allow first one person to say or to forward their questions directly, and then I will go and check on the chat box and will read one question from the audience. And if the time allows, I will go back to the same procedure. All right. So please, if from the audience, if there is someone who would like to ask the question directly, probably mention your name, because I will not be able probably to scroll down and look at who is speaking. So anyone who would like to state your point or questions directly, please do so. Don't be shy. Okay, no? Okay, then I will read first question from the chat box. This is a question from Maya Maharani well, the question is not specifically directed to anyone, but I will just make it open for the three speakers probably would like to comment. So the question is, what do you think about legal ethics and bionomics secure big technology? Is the current legal ethics abandoned? This is a question from Maya Maharani from Sahid University. I think probably Paul, and then maybe Michael later.
Thank you. That is a great question. I think that for the most part, the difficulty with the way legal ethics are portrayed and actually used is the concern there is for liability and what we can get away with, and not so much for what's good for people. And certainly doesn't have a sense in which we're working towards a common good. And so much of our legal system hasn't caught up to what's actually currently being practiced, which is one of the challenges. But even then, the concerns about what's legal often just simply miss the fundamental issues of whether we ought to be doing these things in the first place, or what is the trajectory in which these sort of developments set us on. And so I think in many ways, the way legal ethics have been conceived in this way are just radically insufficient to deal with the challenges in the situation we're in. And very briefly, that's how I begin to answer.
Michael, you would like to add to that?
I would. I have been working in the field of medical ethics for 30 years. I have never seen such a large-scale abandonment by multiple nations of the most fundamental principle of medical ethics, as adumbrated in particular after the Nazi Holocaust of something like 6 million Jews, but also gypsies, mentally disabled people, physically disabled people, political undesirables, dissenters and heretics, all of whom were killed by the Nazis. But many of them, before they were killed, were subjected to mass medical research without their consent, not least because most of them were incarcerated at the time they were in prison. The doctors who did this were tried for murder, mass murder, at the trials in Nuremberg. And those trials led the German jurists, but they weren't just, well, of course, they were not mainly Germans, they were mainly Allied jurists, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom, to develop a new code of conduct, a legal code that cannot be put aside, as Professor Martin suggested, should be put aside for emergencies on a pragmatic basis. But I mean, Paul Martin is a pragmatist, he's from America, right? But I'm sorry, but I take the European view. This is law, and the Nuremberg Code quite clearly says, and if you allow me, Madam Chairman, I will share my screen. The Nuremberg Code quite clearly says the voluntary consent. Can you see the screen? Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Somebody put a thumbs up? Yeah? The voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. This means the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overarching or other ulterior form of coercion or constraint, and should have sufficient knowledge and comprehension of the elements of the subject matter involved. Furthermore, it goes on, the experiment should be so conducted as to avoid all unnecessary physical and mental suffering and injury. And then the degree of risk should be taken, should never exceed that determined by the humanitarian importance of the problem to be solved by sharing these principles. Lockdown is a word that comes from the American prison system. It causes large-scale mental harm and suicide, or attempted suicide, among primarily black and minority prisoners in the American incarceration system, which has the largest number of people incarcerated per head of population of any country on the planet, including communist China. Over 2 million. Most of them are black or Asian or Middle Eastern extraction, and sometimes Mexican. Most of them are in for minor drug offenses. They're subjected to this appalling procedure of lockdown. 24/7. Then the word somehow morphed from the US prison system into the Chinese recommendation, which was pushed by the Chinese social media bots, President Xi, military employed, and this is documented, hundreds of thousands of social media bots to spread around the world ludicrous faked videos about mass death events in Wuhan, which never took place. The original problem in Wuhan was 6 pneumonia cases in a city of over 12 million people. There was never any evidence of a pandemic in Wuhan. On the basis of those videos and those fake messages, the World Health Organization, which is led, by the way, by a man accused of genocide in Ethiopia, Mr. Tedros, the World Health Organization pushed on our suspecting public 3 utterly novel procedures, medical procedures, experimental. The first of which was physical jail in people's homes. And I'm delighted to say I never experienced this because I lived in a wonderful country of Indonesia. Thank you very much, Indonesia. We never had physical jail in this country. We had it in my home country. Second, in other words, in my home country, you can only leave the house with the permission and with the right paperwork of the British, or in the case of Edinburgh, the Scottish government. Now that is a level of control on citizens never before used, and it has resulted in mass mental illness far in excess in terms of its short and long-term effects, including mortality and the kinds of things Paul speaks about in terms of injury. I mean, in the California state, they had so many children committing suicide that they had to abandon the school lockdown policy to try to reduce the deaths and those dying of COVID in California at the time. The point is, lockdown is a totally untried and unevidenced medical procedure. It was foisted in a coercive fashion on large numbers of people, but not by India or by Indonesia. And thank God for Asia and for welcoming me back before this all started. Secondly, anti-social distancing. This is another completely untried procedure. There is no medical evidence for it. There's no proof. that it has worked anywhere to control the transmission of this virus. And then thirdly, of course, mask mandates. Now, I can show you now hundreds of evidence-based studies now of these three novel experiments. And although some will disagree with me, the vast preponderance of those studies indicates that the fiercer the lockdown, the higher was the mortality, whether from COVID-19, suicide, or other cause. Therefore, we can now definitively say in 2021 that these experiments failed. The point is they completely contravene the Nuremberg Code. And in my opinion, those who did this ought to be tried at the International Criminal Court. And there is now a case going forward against the Prime Minister of Israel, one Benjamin Netanyahu, who was born, of course, in Brooklyn and not in Israel, who has imposed medical apartheid on all Israelis and is trying to prevent access to food shops, trying to prevent children taking public exams if they have not been vaccinated. I have seen women in tears in video speaking about this from Israel. It is appalling, obnoxious, and completely against medical ethics. Well, I'm not a pragmatist when it comes to medical ethics. I will not have my bodily integrity intervened with by Bill Gates, AstraZeneca, or the Chinese communist vaccine known, Sinovac, the Chinese communist vaccine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. I hope, some of, well, we want to believe, because now the way we were conditioned is making us frustrated, and so we want to also share your belief that, we can get soon, hopefully, out of this very soon.
Can I have just say something? Can I say something also on the subject?
Oh, sure. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, I was about to give you the next round for to speak, but sure, if you want something to add to this, please.
Yeah, really, both Michael and Martins, they have just tried to touch very important points so far as the pandemic is concerned and ethical concerns are concerned. But I feel that I could get from their presentations, this pandemic seems more man-made than some catastrophe or a disease. So how we can decipher the contours of the subject, because there is a lot of discussion going on worldwide, whether this pandemic has been caused by the efforts of the power be, or it is really a natural phenomenon. So now a lot of doubts have been created for that, especially my presentation has created this. But I feel as a Muslim that whatever the reasons behind this pandemic, this is a great human tragedy. This time we need to become more ethically sound and help people in this distress rather than discussing where from this disease has come. So this is because this happened, is a really, as Buddha was saying that a man has been struck with the spear, so should we take it out or we should discuss where from the spear has come? So we need to address the problems of the people, and from an Islamic point of view, scientific point of view of Islam, and a scientist, a Muslim scientist and a Muslim human person has to help humanity in this time rather than discussing where from the pandemic has come. This was just one observation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I would like just both speakers to hold a little bit, because we have two very important questions, and then while answering to that question, probably you can also refer to the points raised by Professor Hamidullah. So the first, not the first, but the other question was directed to Paul Martin. So Paul Martin's view regarding the use of the IoT in a world post-pandemic is surely inspiring. Data collection, misuse, and security is indeed a thing in the eyes of big companies and governments. In the eyes of Han Byung-chul, I don't know whether I pronounced the name correctly, from Switzerland, the authoritarian regimes were seen doing better in dealing with the pandemic. But I argued in Philo press conference November 2020 that the better handling was not the result of the authoritarian data collection, but the spirit of communitarianism, as Michael Sandel has outlined. Dr. Martin, how do you view this? This is a question from Albert Adinora. He has another question, but I'll just read one for the moment.
Yes, thank you. That's great. Just to clarify from my previous comment, I was referring to bionomics, not bioethics. And what I was referring to is, and I probably wouldn't call myself a pragmatist, but I was referring to the way in which human and ecological interaction it has very few kind of legal context that with any substance, and not biomedical experiments in bioethics. So just to clarify what might have been confusion there. But secondly, yes, I think that's exactly right. I do think that in many cases, the response to the success to the response of COVID has been, if it has been successful, it's not been successful arguably from top-down authoritarian, whether data gathering or not, resolutions, but where communities have agreed and collectively sought to work together to address the problem. And I think this is simply, this is a exemplary of most social and collective problems, but I do think here too, and here's where the difficulty in the American context is, where kind of religious institutions have pitted themselves against the government cases, and the result has been deeply problematic in a variety of ways, as opposed to seeking a kind of a common ground and a communitarian response. And so, yeah, I think you're exactly right, that it isn't because of authoritarian kind of regimes and data collection regimes that these things are ultimately successful, certainly in the long term. But it is this spirit of communitarian that would be, in my mind, is much more determinative of the success. Thank you.
Thank you. I saw from the audience one person has raised his hand, is Ghazi Nazir Nakash. Would you like to raise your question?
Yes, ma'am. I have a question for Dr. Paul Martins. So you were speaking about the Internet of Things in the context of post-pandemic world. We are seeing that the problem of data collection is growing with every passing day. But you had in the very beginning mentioned that we still have some hope because things are in our hands. We can still shape the future. But currently we are seeing that during this pandemic, people are collecting data, and the data collecting forums are getting so stronger, even the governments are not able to do anything to stop them from this data collection and data manipulation. I would like to deliberate once again on the hope that you were talking about, and what hope we have.
Yeah, thank you. It's not an easy.
These things and shaping our.
Sorry. Yeah, my hope isn't an easy hope, but it's a difficult hope, and it's a kind of hope that's born out of a multi-pronged kind of approach. I would say is something like, we don't have to participate in it any more than we want to. Now, this would entail a whole lot of difficulties and challenge our success in our careers and a variety of other things. But there's always a choice at that level. At another level, we all have voices, and this goes to another way where our legal system hasn't caught up to our practices. And we need to challenge, and I think this is beginning to happen in a substantive way, the power that these technology companies have about our data, and the power that they have to share our data. And I think the European Union has been much better at this than probably anyone else at that level. And thirdly, I think we have to be careful in our consumption of data, and the way in which we even think of ourselves and others in relation to data. And so those are just kind of three levels that I think this challenge has to be engaged. But if I've learned anything in life, even systems that are made to run perfectly never really run perfectly. And so part of what becomes possible is that we just aren't made to be machines. And I think we need to realize that and refuse that and start living differently. But it's in many ways the most digital generation that probably will be the best at it.
Could I answer the question of our esteemed colleague about the origin of the virus, please?
Sorry,
Madam Chair? Yeah? I think it's a very important question raised by our colleague about the origin of the virus. And if you will allow me, I would like to share one scientific paper which is very clear evidence of the origin of the virus. Is that possible? This is the paper. It's from PLOS, which is the proceedings of it's an American scientific journal. The lead author is at the end, but she is known as the Bat Woman, Zhang Li. She's made this life's mission to go to bat caves in southern China, extract novel viruses, take them back to laboratories, not only in China, but also in North Carolina, in America, and then experiment on them in order then to study their potential effects on those mammals, including how they can destroy the lining of the lung in mice and ferrets and cats and so on. And the paper is clearly identified as also being published in a journal edited by Christian Drosten, who is the man who gave us the fraudulent PCR test in Germany in 2020, which we're told tells us we're ill when we've just got a cold, or even when we just have to go to an airport. Even although the WHO in January 2021 has now said one positive PCR test is not evidence of illness. Furthermore, the paper is published jointly and was funded by Communist government of China. Notice, the National Natural Science Foundation of China is communist.
Okay.
In case you need reminding of that. And who the director of that is in the United States, anybody? It's a certain Dr. Fauci, otherwise known as Dr. Faustus, in my opinion. That's a better name for him. The point about this paper is that it clearly shows that the scientists in the laboratories in Wuhan and North Carolina, the team of scientists from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, I've worked in Chapel Hill, and the Wuhan Virology Lab, which is a bioweapons laboratory, by the way, worked together to test how the virus interacted, and it clearly shows it here, with the human ACE2 receptors. Now, how did they do that? They didn't just do it in vitro. They edited the genetic structure, the genome of this bat virus, and they spliced into it human genes, and then they infected mammals with that newly genetically engineered virus. And then they announced that indeed this virus, this novel genetically engineered virus, has potential, as they say in this and another of their articles, for emergence in the human population, a potential they created in the laboratory in Wuhan. So our esteemed colleague is absolutely right. And I agree with him that many Muslims, more interestingly than Christians, for whatever reason, are raising the question, why on earth was this virus created in the first place? It did not come from a Malayan pangolin. This was absolute nonsense. It didn't come from the wet market in Wuhan. These are all made-up stories. Even the Washington Post is now reporting what I am telling you. It's been on Sky News Australia as well, another mainstream media outlet. And a number of other journalists have finally started to actually read scientific journals. Thank God for that. A year too late, and noticed that the virus was actually genetically engineered and didn't come about from people going climbing or going into wilderness. It's complete nonsense. I completely agree with our colleague. Human beings are not supposed to do this kind of thing. We should stop the genetic engineering of viruses forthwith, given what some, including, of course, Professor Paul Martins, are saying about the inherent dangers, apparently, of COVID-19. Now, I would underline that if you look at global mortality statistics, or the mortality statistics of the United States, the United Kingdom, or indeed Indonesia, you do not see unambiguous scientific evidence of a mass death event such as the Spanish flu. Thank you very much.
Okay. Okay, there was actually another question to you, Michael, but I think because there is also another one directed to Paul Martin, so I will read the one for Paul Martin first. Thank you, Mr. Paul Martins, for your insightful thought. This is a question from Azrina Sabila from Gajah Mada University. As nowadays, using electronic media become very necessary, especially during this pandemic, but we know that using too much electronic is also threatening as it has the radiation damages. So how do you respond to that? And do you think if in the future using printed mass media, newspaper, tabloids will be happening again, as it could be an alternative for information distribution in the society with less radiation damages? So please see forward. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. Lots of good questions. Lots of unclear answers. I don't think we're going to return to printed mass media. I don't think people have the time and energy for it, and I don't think we have the resources for it. We don't have the natural resources necessary to return to that sort of production at the level we currently expect our information to be communicated. I think that there's going to be few options in the short term, and I think it's one of those things that many people will just make peace with, like so many people know that Diet Coke is bad for them and still drink it, or so many people know that smoking is bad for them and continue. So I think that this is one of those things that's going to be part and parcel of our existence for a while, and I think that if people get a sufficient number of people make a sufficient issue about it, new innovations and development will push us in that direction. But I just think that the only way to change that is to agitate for it, because it's not going to change on its own. And I think most of us are going to just accept that as part. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying most of us are just going to accept that as part and parcel of our everyday existence. But I think that's right, and those are concerns that we should have. And the amount of time we spend on screens is ridiculous relative to the meaningful life we ought to be having. But it is a great question.
Yeah, I agree. There are a lot of good questions, but also probably not many answers.
Can I offer an answer to the
I
question?
would like to give the opportunity for Professor Hamidullah probably to say if anything that you would like to respond, because you haven't been given the time to speak. Professor Hamidullah, if you have.
Yeah, I have something to say. Madam, basically, I wanted to mention also in my paper, which because of the paucity of time, I could not mention that. During this COVID pandemic, Muslim scientists and Muslim community of the scientists were exposed. And we had to depend again on other nations for even the small the medicines and even the COVID vaccines and other things. We could not develop our own variety of vaccines, although there is nothing wrong in that importing vaccines from other countries. But this also showed the abysmal interest of the Muslim community in the medical science and the scientific development in their own countries. And this also calls for a change of mind and making the scientific culture prevalent among the Muslim communities and making science education part and parcel of our curricula worldwide. And we need an international association for this, there may be some, committee internationally working for the scientific matters in the Muslim countries, because we are abysmally lacking scientific culture in our countries, and we are still believing in there's charlatans and other things, and which is very unfortunate given the past, glorious past of the Muslims, when people like Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd and Ibn Hassam and others, they were making new discoveries, not only in the fields of astronomy, but even in medical sciences. And we had people like Avicenna, and they were making new discoveries in medical field, but it is very unfortunate that Muslim countries have been lacking on this front as well. So my lecture was in that context, that we need to create a culture and atmosphere in Muslim countries for reception of scientific knowledge and scientific discoveries, which otherwise are also encouraged by Islam. If we keep Islam, if we will see Islam from the textual point of view, rather than seeing Islam in the historical context and or in our own context, which has become local in many ways. But if we see the universal aspects of Islam, as I have tried to, epistemological metrics, so then there is quite a good scope for developing that culture where we can meet new challenges. And as our friends Michael and Martin has said, that we have become now, we are at the mercy of the nations who have their own political and economic interests in creating these genetically, I should say, fabricated diseases and other things, and they can just harm cause of the community and the community of the Muslims as well by using such scientific tools, not for the good purposes, for the humanistic purposes, but even for the devastation of the world, as has been mentioned by, amply by Professor Michael. And I feel scared in such circumstances, if still we are not awakened from our dogmatic slumbers, and we are not turning back to our past so that to get inspiration for developing science and technology for the good of human beings, rather than just for the consumeristic and materialistic, ideals which the West has espoused in Muslim countries during these all years, which has been also endorsed by Professor Michael. Thank you very much, ma'am.
All right, thank you very much. I see actually.
May I offer an answer to that question, Madam Chairman?
Sorry, Michael, I didn't hear you.
May I offer an answer to the question about hazard?
Yeah. Well, there is another question for you, but
Okay.
I don't
Okay.
think that it's actually came from the same person. So probably, I don't know if this is Albert Adiputra from the Bioethics of Graduate School of Gadjah Mada University. And since Pak Michael is here in Jogja, I hope there will be opportunity for Mas Albert to talk to you directly, probably sometime.
Yeah, sure. We
Because
are
now
welcome.
that we are ready for the closing, and already Ibu Hilda from the School of Graduate Studies is already present here. So unfortunately, I cannot take the other questions because I saw someone also raising hand. So unfortunately, we have to stop here. But please do not leave the Zoom platform as yet, because we're going to have closing statements and just a small ceremony. So please stay with us. Thank you very much for all the three speakers, and let us give an applause. Thank you for Michael Northcott. Thank you for Professor Hamidullah. I don't know what time is it now at your end, but
It's,
I know for
it's just
Paul Martin is almost
1:48.
morning. So thank you for staying up late. And I'm not going to make any further conclusion, but I believe, as Paul Martin said in the last statement, that there are many good questions that enough probably for us to make some further reflections. And let's hope what will come in the near future will be much better. even though we cannot go back to the normal, but hopefully we will still be able to enjoy something near to normal. Okay, so that's all from me. Thank you very much, and we'll see you at different occasion. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you very much for the insightful discussion in our last plenary session. Thank you for the chair, Dr. Fatima Hussein, and thank you for the three speakers, Professor Hamidullah Marazi, Associate Professor Paul Martins, and Professor Michael Norcott. And now is the time for award-winning announcement and information about the IGSSCI certificate. To the Deputy Dean of the UGM Graduate School, Dr. Hilda Ismail, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Master of Ceremony. Yeah, I would like to announce the announcement is, I think, might be waiting for everybody here, and I'm very happy to inform you, to tell you that we have 5 winners here, which has been decided, and after considering some points of the presentation and the papers, also the videos that has been sent and the activity during the discussions. So now we have 5 winners here, and I would like to read it from the number 5th. Yeah? The number 5th is the presentation given by Ms. Francisca Johanna Sriwinarse, which is the title is Gerakan Masyarakat Cinta Air, GMCA, Community Movement to Appreciate Water, a parochial-based approach to save the environment, a study case in St. Maria Lourdes Parish, Sumber, Muntilan, Magelang. Congratulations to Ms. Francisca. And then number 4th is the presentation titled Women and Islamism, the nexus between reason, emotion, and environment. Should be very interesting. And it is presented by Ms. Maurisa Zinira. Congratulations to Ms. Maurisa Zinira. Number 3rd is presentation titled Indigenous Resistance to Corporate Power Marapu Religious Worldview, contesting the secularized perspective on land. It is presented by Mr. Chris Haryanto Umbu. Congratulations also to Mr. Chris Haryanto Umbu. And then, the second best is the presentation titled Reading the Signs of the Times, Christian Apocalypticism, and the Conspiracy of Covidians. And this is presented by Mr. Leonard C. Epafras. Congratulations to Leonard. And then the best one is the presentation titled Negotiation Against Patriarchal Ideology, a Resistance of Women Workers in Mining Industry. It's very interesting. And it's presented by Mrs. Sulfatun Mahmuda. Congratulations to Ibu Sulfatun Mahmuda. So again, congratulations to our 5 best presenters this afternoon. And then you will be contacted by the committee for the next talk about the prize that have been prepared by the committee. Thank you, and I give back the time to Mr. Ina.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we are moving on to the last step of our conference, the final remarks from our head steering committee, Dr. Diki Sofian. So please, Pak Diki, the floor is yours.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you all. It has been 2 days now since we embarked on an intellectual journey together in the 11th International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia. We have witnessed over 100 papers presented over the course of 2 days. We had 1 keynote address, 3 plenary sessions, and 25 parallel sessions. This year's theme, Culture, Technology, and Social Transformation in the Quest for Human Dignity, has evidently drawn a lot of interest from many graduate students and scholars from around the world, as you saw in this tightly scheduled 2-day conference. Unfortunately, all good things must come to an end. But I'm certainly certain that all of us will come out of this conference smarter, wiser, and hopefully more optimistic and confident in our research, thinking, writing, and living. We do realize that given the restrictions of the COVID-19 pandemic, this is the best what we could offer the Graduate School of UGM. Usually, the conference invites scholars and graduate students from many countries, and always, based on my experience, that the UGM Graduate School usually provides a great hospitality to all of the participants, making the intellectual engagement more meaningful and oftentimes more informal, which is always the best way to build scientific research networks. However, despite this shortcoming, I do hope that you all have enjoyed the journey together. And I sincerely hope that you have genuinely made new friends and acquaintances, albeit virtually. As in all closing remarks, I would like to thank all of my colleagues in the UGM Graduate School, the Dean, of course, Professor Siti Muhammad, the Deputy Deans, Dr. Hilda Ismail, and Dr. Habib Mustafa, Pak Pariana, Pak Puji, Mbak Ana, Mbak Vita, and all others, without whom this conference will not be able to be executed. I would also like to convey my gratitude to all my academic colleagues here in the UGM Graduate School who acted as moderators throughout the conference, the professors, the researchers and lecturers. We also have the Master of Ceremony, Ni Wayan Radita Puspita Sari, PhD ABD, and Mbak Ida Fitria from the Indonesian Consortium for Religious Studies. I would also like to mention our technicians who have worked tirelessly to make sure that we don't experience any technical glitches along the way. I would also like to mention and convey my thanks to all of the speakers and registered participants who have spent time with us, posed questions to the speakers, and were enthusiastically following the event since the outset. Now, we do plan to publish a proceeding to this conference, but there may also be opportunities for those whose papers are considered fit to print to be published with the UGM online journals, or even the graduate school journals. There have also been talks with the CSIS, for those who are interested in being published together with the CSIS, and also the American Institute for Indonesian Studies. And perhaps also the International Journal of Interreligious and Intercultural Studies based at the Hindu University of Indonesia in Bali. So there is an immense opportunity for publications, and if ever you request that you do not want to be published, your papers to be published with us, then please do send an email to the organizers. Lastly, as a people of faith, we'd like to convey our gratitude to Allah Almighty, who has given us the strength, commitment, and enthusiasm throughout this event. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. So thank you very much, and I do hope that we could meet again in 2 years down the line. That would be in 2023 in the 12th International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia. I do hope and pray that we'll be able to meet again face to face without any physical distancing or social restrictions. Thank you, stay safe, and stay healthy. Peace be upon you all.
thank you very much to Dr. Diki Sofian. And I want to announce once more all the winners, and I hope you will turn on your videos and say something so that we can know which one you are. The first one is Zulfatun Mahmuda. The title is about negotiation against patriarchal ideology, a resistance of women workers in mining industry. And the second one is Leonard C. Epaphras. The title is about reading the signs of the times, Christian apocalypticism, and the conspiracy of Covidians. The third is Chris Saryanto Umbu. The title is about indigenous resistance to corporate power Marapu religious worldview, contesting the secularized perspective on land. And then the fourth one is Mauriza Zinira. The title is about women and Islamism, the nexus between reason, emotion, and environment. And the last one is Francisca Johanna Sri Winarsi. The title is about Gerakan Masyarakat Cinta Air, GMCA, community movement to appreciate water, a parochial-based approach to save the environment, a study case in Saint Maria Laudres Parish, Sumber, Muntilan, Magelang. Okay, I will repeat it again. The first one is Zulfatun Mahmuda. The second one is Leonard C. Epaphras. The third one is Chris Saryanto Umbu. The fourth one, Mauriza Zinira. The fifth one is Francisca Johanna Sri Winarsi. Okay, now we will continue. And now we are arriving at the end of our conference on the 11th International Graduate Students and Scholars Conference in Indonesia 2021. We are hoping that through this conference, we will increase our knowledge about culture, technology, and social transformation in the quest for human dignity. Thank you very much for our speakers, distinguished guests, and participants. And I will close this conference with Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Santi 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 Om. Namo Buddhaya and salam sejahtera bagi kita semua. Thank you very much.